Good evening and welcome to Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. Fake news has never been just an American problem, but President Trump can certainly claim ownership rights of the naming rights. In fact, British newspapers are well known for their big headlines, curious stories that sell papers with tabloid sensibilities. They call them red tops, the Mirror, the Sun, the Daily Star, to name a few. And while a lot of people are drawn to the deliberately heightened emotional stories, they publish true or mostly not. Readers and viewers know the difference because those attention-grabbing headlines and the more staid left-leaning journalism of the BBC. Until now, because suddenly the BBC's Director General and CEO of news have resigned. It appears that Trump derangement syndrome, as the White House calls it, has jumped the pond. After it was discovered that the BBC edited a speech by President Trump to make it appear that he said something he never meant, they deliberately edited not just any speech, but the one that preceded the riot at the U.S. Capitol, trying to make it sound as though Trump was calling for the protesters to take direct violent action at the Capitol, which he never did. In fact, the comments from the speech they edited together were 50 minutes apart in real time. So now it seems that even British journalists couldn't resist trying to take a shot at President Trump, and like so many others, by misrepresenting what he says and does. So fake news is spreading. And here's the kicker. One of them two BBC executives who resigned, they originally came from NBC, where she was president of their news operation. With that, I want to bring in our guest tonight. He's the executive editor of NewsBusters, Tim Graham. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thank you.
NewsBusters was built on exposing the liars and finding the truth in media. We've known for years that the BBC produces a very left-leaning product, but did you have any idea that they'd edit together something this bad and this dishonest and think they wouldn't get caught?
It's always a surprise when they think they won't get caught. I mean, there is more recent examples. You know, they had this documentary recently on a Palestinian child, victimized Palestinian child. Oops, son of a Hamas commander. You know, and like where we weren't going to be found out. So I guess the Trump news wasn't quite as surprising as it might have been a year or two ago. But it is just simply irresponsible to edit two pieces of film together and try to convince people that something was said that wasn't really said.
You know, the president's been talking about this problem for a long time. Listen to when we first heard him say fake news during his first press conference after getting elected. He was calling out CNN's Jim Acosta during a rather chaotic scene.
Your organization
You are attacking our news organization. Can you give us a chance to ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can you state,
Quiet.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
can you state
She's
categorically,
asking a question.
Mr.
Don't be rude.
President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be
You're
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you
No,
give
I'm
us
not
a
going to give you a
question?
question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Well, CNN eventually offered Acosta a nearly invisible overnight slot, and he resigned. Meanwhile, the president's now going to sue the BBC for misrepresenting his speech. He's won other lawsuits, but do you think these people will ever learn that telling the truth really does matter?
I think if they believe in winning. That's what they believe in. So, you know, we just had an election and they can say, well, maybe our media bias works. The Democrats, you know, had a good day. The Republicans had a bad day. And they think mission accomplished. I really think that's the mission they're after, is victory and not telling the truth or offering people news. I mean, to some degree, the term fake news means what you're producing isn't objective. It's not organized to just give people facts. It's organized like a campaign advertisement. We see a lot of that. We certainly did on CNN. Everything they wanted to do was attacking Trump, and that's what he was talking about.
Well, as I mentioned, the BBC's head of news, Deborah Turnus, was running NBC News for 4 years. Do you think she took some of what she did at MSNBC over to the BBC only to have it backfire?
Well, I don't think she was responsible for the fake Dateline GM truck debacle. I mean, clearly American media outlets have made these mistakes as well. But you know, I think the whole system of the BBC comes from an arrogance that they really are the government-funded broadcaster, but also They like to think of themselves as the very gold standard of news media in the Western world. Certainly, PBS and NPR here in the United States think of the BBC as that's what they want to be like. And that's exactly the problem, is they are all a group of arrogant leftists who think that they are the guardians of democracy and the facts. But again, they're more interested in marshaling the facts in such a way that Democrats win, which isn't always factual. And a lot of times it's not democratic in that it allows more than one point of view.
You know, what we're describing rather casually really is a complete corruption of what journalism existed as for many, many decades. I mean, there wasn't a standard of at least a sense of objectivity, and you're describing something completely different. Is there any course correction or any regret over what's happened?
I mean, there's certainly a different way to do it. You know, we are looking now at this cable channel News Nation, which is trying to go back to sort of that old-fashioned, let's make sure both sides get a soundbite. It's not hard to do. It's not hard to make. It's not something that's too antiquated to practice. It's just, I think that in America, we have a place now where people are like, well, I want my news cooked up this way, or I want my news cooked up that way. And they serve different audiences, Republican audiences, Democrat audiences. But certainly you can still make a product where both sides get a shot, and that you can acknowledge facts that might not be helpful to one side or another. I think there's still room for that. I think there's still an audience for that.
Well, the lawsuits seem to be playing a role in all of this. Are they going to eventually force news editors and journalists to aim for more of a centrist truth rather than see their reputations get soiled?
Well, again, you can be biased and yet not find yourself liable for defamation. You know, I think the thing that was, for example, that was so funny about the CBS suit was what they really needed to do was just put out a transcript and a video. The FCC ultimately succeeded in getting CBS to put out a transcript and a video months later. Donald Trump just gave an interview to 60 Minutes. And it was Donald Trump that put the recording out right away, and then CBS felt like they could do the same. And that's the way it should be. But you know, when CBS interviewed Joe Biden for 60 Minutes, they weren't going to put out an entire video. They weren't going to put out a whole transcript of what Biden was asked and what he said, because it probably would have been embarrassing to Biden. So yeah, I mean, you can be a tilted news source and yet not be liable to be sued. They can't seem to find where the line is.
Well, there's another component that's a part of this now. More of the big media is being taken over by people with really deep pockets. Bezos with the Washington Post, CBS by Paramount, ABC and Disney. Do you think that any of them will eventually see a financial reason to report the truth rather than have to face the lawsuits and the bad publicity that comes with being forced into court?
I think that's part of the reason why Paramount wants to do something different. And they've done this wildly controversial thing of naming an editor-in-chief who has a record of wanting to hear from both sides. This is, of course, deeply disturbing to the veterans inside CBS News. We're very scared that their network might try fair and balanced. Like, that's frightening. They see fair and balanced as a surrender to Trump. I mean, that's really the mindset they have. So again, their idea of CBS is a crown jewel when it's absolutely subservient to the Bidens or the Obamas or the Clintons. That's the ideal. But I think, yeah, CBS to some extent, what they might be saying is, we're tired of CBS being in third place. Let's try something different to see if we can be in first place.
Well, Tim, we need to take a short break. Can you stay for another segment?
Sure.
If you've got an opinion about the American media, I'd like you to share it with me at ajnow.com. The link is at the top of the homepage, so it's easy to do. You can take a moment. I'll be right back with more from Tim Graham. Well, I'm back now with the executive editor of NewsBusters, Tim Graham. Tim, I'd like to ask you to help us out by giving us a couple more examples of what the media has done or tried to do to distort the real world, so we can know what to look for if we think we're spotting fake news?
Well, one of the other suits, of course, was the ABC suit where George Stephanopoulos insisted that Donald Trump had been found liable for rape, which was not accurate. And of course, one of the reasons that Disney gave in to Trump on that was they didn't want his lawyers getting into the Stephanopoulos emails. You know, this is, again, the danger for them, is they don't want us to know how they cook up the news product. You know, we did see that when Fox News was sued over the 2020 election. And you could see there was a lot of debate and dispute going on inside Fox about how they were covering the aftermath of the 2020 race. They thought that was fantastic to have all of that data when it was Fox data. The rest of the media doesn't really want everybody to know what's going on inside the liberal networks. But look, all the time, they are collating and very carefully organizing the news. And it's not just what they put on the air, but there's so many stories that they refuse to put on the air. And we like drawing attention to that, to say, here's stories they don't want to tell you. For example, the only way we learned that there were slaughter of Christians in Nigeria is because Trump brought it up. And then they had the audacity to try to suggest this wasn't really happening in Nigeria, which was completely mind-boggling. Anybody who looks into the actual data from human rights groups knows there's slaughter of Christians in Nigeria.
Well, is most of the distortion about chasing traffic for profit, or is it more about the liberal and progressive agenda that's on display?
Yeah, I think the agenda comes number one. I think most of the arrogant journalists here don't care about profits. You know, the people at the Washington Post really don't care whether Jeff Bezos makes a profit. I think they're more concerned about maybe they'll earn a few prizes, they'll get a Pulitzer Prize. You usually win those for being on the right topic. Whether it's actually accurate or not is not as important. Like, you know, the Washington Post won an award for reporting on so-called Russian collusion with Trump. When that wasn't true, it's like, well, but your heart was in the right place. You were on the right subject. So maybe there's a little people wanting prizes, but I think most journalists might care about their own pay package, but they're not really concerned about the bottom line in their own company.
How much does all the distortion in the news make things worse just overall for the country?
Well, I think, yeah, here's one example for me. We're getting near Thanksgiving, and when people sit down at Thanksgiving, if they have political conversations over the turkey, I try not to do that. But a lot of times your liberal family members will have no idea what you're talking about because, again, they're watching news that is very one-sided and keeps a lot of things out of the news. So they feel like you've got a second head when you start explaining some of these things. You know, who is Hunter Biden and what was on his laptop? And they're like, why do I have to care about that? So I always tell everybody, you want to get a balanced diet. You know, obviously we spend a lot of our day watching the networks we disagree with so we can explain them to people. But also it's helpful to just see raw news events and see speeches that political leaders make so you can understand how it gets sliced and diced.
You know, looking back, I can think of the American tabloids that existed decades ago, followed by a period where good journalism seems to have won the day. Whoever got the story first and got it right had the most traffic. Do you have any idea why things changed? Do you think there'll ever be a return to the truth in that sense?
Well, I mean, again, I always try to say, if I pick up a newspaper like the Washington Post, and I've read the Washington Post for decades, you know, I wouldn't tell you most of the stories in there are full of lies. It's just a matter of, part of the problem we have now is that there's so much opinion in our news, is that they can't just give you that old-fashioned thing. The president gave a speech today. Here's how it was received by the Democrats. No, it's more like the story begins with, Donald Trump lied again today, you know, and destroyed democracy, the end. I mean, it would be nice, again, if we could find that pattern of just trying to not treat the reader like they're stupid. Just explain, here's what happened. Here's how people thought about what happened. that would be nice, and I think we could all benefit from it.
Amen. Well, Tim Graham, thank you for your time today. Remind our viewers where they can find your good work each day.
Well, we're at newsbusters.org, where we're constantly putting up videos and transcripts and kind of exposing what we see. And I also host the NewsBusters podcast, where we talk about these issues.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Stay in touch so we can have you back again.
Thank you, sir.
In a moment, given that it's Veterans Day, I'll have something to say to all who have served our country or are serving in the military right now. Millions of men and women standing watch on our behalf. I'll be right back. We are living in a time of unprecedented manipulation and deception. The lies coming from the legacy media and influential voices, sometimes they just seem astonishing. But I want to remind you that truth cannot be defeated. There's a moral and spiritual authority in God's truth. If you suppress the truth, it's like holding a ball underwater. Eventually, it'll come up again. Well, the good news is we as Christ followers have a tremendous opportunity. We live in a country that affords us the freedom to speak, the freedom to worship. And on this Veterans Day, I want to remember the brave men and women who have made sacrifices for our freedoms. Freedom is not cheap, and it certainly isn't free. If you're a veteran, we salute you. We offer you our heartfelt gratitude for defending our freedoms and liberties. Your discipline and obedience, they change the destinies of other people's lives. And for that reason, I call you a hero. Veterans are our friends, relatives, neighbors, co-workers, and church members. Many of our veterans are rightfully proud of their service. Others have been told that their service for our nation was not given in an honorable cause, and that's left them conflicted. Some of them were wounded physically and bear the scars. Others bear psychological scars that aren't as visible, but they're very real nonetheless. Well, my plea to all Christ followers is to think about others and not just about yourself. Be aware, listen to those around you, see if they need help. And if you meet a veteran, say thank you. I also want to remind us all to use the freedoms that we're so blessed with. Our future depends more on the vitality of the church than it does on conservatism or progressives. The voice of the church is so important. You know, I know it's often hated or at least diminished. I know there's attempts to try to squelch that, but it isn't about us. It's about the one that we serve. We're going to need the courage and the willingness to say, God bless America again, in the public squares, in our workplaces, hospitals, courtrooms, and our classrooms. And that is a reason for hope. We'll be back with your emails. Thank you for taking the time to send your emails. They are always a highlight for us. Joe from Rhode Island wrote, I'm concerned that Charlie Kirk's murder was a loss, for it's being used in a way that will turn his memory into an idol. We can't let that happen. Well, Joe, I think there's a couple of things we have to remember. Charlie left us a legacy. He led his life. He lived it. We won't change that. I share some concerns around the frenzy after Charlie's assassination as well. But we can take the principles he stood for and live those forward using our own voices for truth. Don't let the media or other people's opinions or even their motives stop us from doing what we know to be the right thing. I believe that's the way we honor Charlie and, more importantly, the principles for which he stood. A viewer commented on YouTube, you made a good point, Pastor Allen. The Islamic people in Islam is not a peaceful people, because if they were, with so many of them in that region, there would have been peace long ago. Thank you so much for having the courage to say that. Well, thank you. Sometimes the simple truth that we see gets clouded by all the language around it. It helps to pay attention and think about what you're seeing. Jimmy S. from Alabama wrote, I'm watching your show with Mr. Bluey. I'm old enough to remember that years ago, when the news channels made a mistake, they would apologize and correct themselves a day or two later. My mother always said, always tell the truth, and you won't have to remember what you said. Well, I can remember that as well, Jimmy, and I can remember some other things that my mother had to say. That'd be an interesting program, Lessons from Our Moms. I'll have to think about that one a little bit. We're going to do a program in the near future where we use only your emails. If you'd like to be a part of that program, take a minute. You go to ajnow.com. There's a button there. Click Send us an email on your perspectives. We might read them on the air, and you'll get to be a part of that program. It's an exciting season. God's moving in the earth. Don't miss that. Don't get confused, and certainly don't be overcome by despair at the darkness. God has not abandoned us. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us, and I pray you have a good evening.